Welcome to our November COLERA lecture. Today, our event is regarding artificial intelligence in the workplace. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're very pleased to have two amazing speakers who are going to talk to us about this topic. We're really looking forward to it. As a side note, if you are an attorney, our course has been pre-approved by the Supreme Court of Ohio for 1.0 hours of general CLE credits. As we've done in the past for our virtual events, if you are an attorney seeking credit for today's course, we will have a point where you're going to need to watch the chat log carefully because we will be requesting you to enter your name and attorney registration number in the chat log at least 2 times, if not 3 or 4. We try to keep you on your toes here. If you are an attorney seeking credit for today's course, you must enter your name and attorney registration number each time we request it. And in addition, the course has not been pre-approved for SHRM credits. However, if you'd like to apply yourselves for credit after the fact, we will provide you with a certificate of completion. If you, at the same time, are requesting CLE credits, enter your name and SHRM in response to each of our requests in the chat log. So again, if you would like to receive a certificate for completion of today's course for SHRM, self-application credit, just let me know in the chat log by entering your name and SHRM each time we request CLE credits. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers today. We have with us Rick Bales, who is a faculty member at Ohio Northern University Law School, teaching in labor and employment and ADR courses, along with torts and civil procedures. He's published more than 100 scholarly articles and co-authored or authored approximately 10 books on a variety of topics related to labor, employment, and ADR. He is also a labor arbitrator and a member of the NAA, the FMCS, the AAA, and SERB, along with Michigan, Minnesota, Houston, the City of Columbus, Lockheed Martin, and the Virgin Islands. So we have a great speaker with us today who is going to be Rick Bales, along with Lindsay Wagner. Ms. Wagner is licensed to practice law in California, Florida, New York, and Ohio. And she is the founder and managing partner of both Moxie Mediation, employment mediation, workplace training, and workplace investigation firm, and Wagner Legal and Employment Law Firm. She is also employed as of counsel with the Ramo Law PC, a Beverly Hills, California entertainment law firm. Prior to opening her practices, she worked with the Florida-based employment litigation firm of Scott Wagner and Associates for over 13 years with practice in assisting employers and employees in employment litigation, both state and federal, along with arbitration matters, employment-related counseling and compliance, workplace training, and workplace investigations. She is a member of several bar associations and is a mediator, civil certified mediator, and Association of Workplace Investigators certificate holder, along with employment mediator and arbitrator with the American Arbitration Association. So we're looking forward to their speeches today, their information, their PowerPoints. We will be providing you with links to their PowerPoints in the chat log. So we will be providing those shortly. If you're interested, please feel free to download them. With that, Rick, I will turn it over to you, sir.
All right, thanks. I am sharing my screen. Please let me know if it goes south for some reason.
Looks great, sir. I think if you just go ahead and put it in presentation mode.
Perfect. You see it now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So I guess Lindsay now will be talking about artificial intelligence and the workplace. My focus will be kind of on what artificial intelligence is, how it's being used in the workplace, and some kind of big picture implications for a more kind of practical application of AI in the workplace. And then Lindsay is going to step in and talk to you about the legal stuff, right? What this means for EEOC, what the EEOC is doing about it, what the DOL is doing about it, implications for labor unions and for traditional labor law. So that's kind of how we're divvying things up. We should have plenty of time at the end for Q&A or for comment or for folks to just say, hey, this is what I've experienced or this is what I'm seeing. And I'd love to hear some of that. So just a little bit of background. Artificial intelligence it's the use of computers to simulate intelligent behavior. Basically, it's gathering tons of data and using it to predict the future somehow. And often those predictions about the future are predictions about how we will act, what we will do, um, or even who we are. And it's those kinds of predictions, especially in the workplace, that I kind of want to focus on. Now, I'm sure as you all know, lots of data gets collected in lots of different environments on all of us. Every time you choose a show on Netflix, every time you place an order on Amazon, um, anytime you do anything on the web, someone somewhere is collecting information about you, and not just about what you order, but all kinds of stuff. And heaven forbid, you've got a Roomba that has mapped out the interior of your house, or if you have one of those, doorbell thingies that know everyone who comes into your house, or one that scans your, all that, right? Tons of data being collected on all of us all the time, not just in the workplace, but also in the workplace. And the key to AI is that super cheap computers make it possible to crunch all that data and to use it to, like I said, to predict the future. And so, all this, social media, internet searches, buying history on Amazon, all that stuff can get kind of aggregated, and the computers can crunch it, and they can use it um, to make predictions about us all in the aggregate. And so, for example, Google using millions of past searches to predict what you will, when you type in a couple of words, to predict what you're looking for. But it can also be very individualized. So Amazon using our past purchases to predict what we are going to want to buy in the future. And what Amazon has been saying for the last several years, still hasn't happened yet, but they've been saying that at some point, not that distant future, Amazon will be able Amazon will be sending us stuff before we even order it, because they will know before we do that we want it. And their predictive power will be so good that even if occasionally they guess wrong and we return something, they will guess right most of the time, at least often enough to make money out of it, right? And so that these predictions can be at the big picture level, at the looking at what we as humans do kind of in the aggregate, or it can be very, very individualized. And I think a lot of the individualized collection of data and predictions based on that data is what kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. And again, it's valuable because you can kind of use it to predict the future. Um, if you run enough work emails through a computer algorithm, um, that algorithm might be able to predict things like a propensity to workplace violence, or a propensity to um, I don't know, to some sort of misconduct in the workplace, or perhaps more positively, a propensity to be a star employee, a workaholic, a go-getter, an overachiever, the person who deserves the next promotion. um, and I think that the fascinating, or one of the fascinating things about this, is that it can make these predictions not just by looking for keywords. I mean, if you find keywords in someone's email that talks about explosions or heavy weapons, or killing coworkers or going postal or something like, okay, that's fine. But I think the more interesting predictions come not out of finding keywords that you and I would flag, right, as predictors of future behavior, but by finding weird correlations in the data that you and I would never dream would correlate with future workplace behavior, but that actually do, perhaps for reasons that we have no idea, right? So this is looking at correlation and not causation. Um, and so maybe, I mean, just to give kind of one example, an, a firm did what they did is they 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 took the resumes of that engineers submitted in applications for an engineering position, and then they tracked the engineers 5 or 10 years forward, or 5 or 10 years in time, and then they went back and looked at their original applications and compared their applications to how they did over the next 5 years at the new firm, and what they found was that the shorter the resume, the better the engineer performed. Counterintuitive. Not quite sure why that was, but nonetheless, it's predictive, right? Correlation, it's not causation. We don't know why, but if it tells us something useful, that that could be interesting. That might be the basis for looking for short resumes for engineers who are applying for particular positions under these particular circumstances, right? Um, and that's what I think is really fascinating is drawing correlations from stuff that might not ever occur to us. Um, and so some examples um, include things like hiring. Um, you've probably heard of algorithms doing like word searches on on resumes that have been submitted for jobs, and they might try to correlate. Okay, so how many times does a magic word uh, appear on this resume? How often do the words on this resume correlate with the words that are in the job description? Okay, again, but that's the simple stuff. I think the far more interesting and complex and where AI is going is pulling all kinds of other information and data from the resume, and again, making those correlations. And one of the trends in hiring these days is video interviews. So instead of doing an in-person interview, they might do a video interview. And the purpose isn't just to do a Zoom interview for the convenience so that nobody has to travel. Um, Part of the purpose in many of these video interviews is to keep the interview, the data that's encoded in that interview, and use that data to analyze the applicant, facial expressions, uh, mannerisms, I don't know, blinks of the eye. Again, I'm making this stuff up, but uh, use of words, perhaps particular words, perhaps the words that indicate a person's educational level, perhaps certain words, use of certain words or certain types of words correlate with certain characteristics, aspects of personality, um, you know, chances of success at the job, propensity to commit sexual harassment, who knows what, right? But again, collect enough data, crunch that data strongly enough, you can find weird correlations that are predictive. And that's the whole idea. A lot of these are fairly crude, or at least I think that they're fairly crude now. They're not particularly predictive. They're not any more predictive than Amazon is at trying to predict what I want to buy next. But the idea is that if you collect enough data on enough people over a long enough period of time, the predictive value will get much higher. So one of the things that's going on right now is that there are what I would call kind of HR service providers, a bunch of startups that are trying to sell their services to large companies. And it's not just that they want the business of the large companies, but they really want is the data from those large companies, because the more that they can convince these companies to hire them to do things like sort resumes or to do video interviews or to do things like that might look like they're kind of helping out in the hiring process or kind of automating the hiring process. The more that these HR service providers do that, the more data they collect on more people and the more predictive their algorithms become. And the idea is that they may be offering their services at very low cost today. They may even be doing it for almost for free today, on the understanding that their predictive value isn't really all that high. And so mostly what they're going to help you do is sort resumes as opposed to, say, predicting someone's propensity to commit workplace violence. But after they've gotten, a couple of companies in the door and they've started gathering all this data over a longer period of time, boom, now they've got the data that makes it much more predictive and makes their services much more valuable. Raises all kinds of questions. Who owns this data? If I do a video interview, can I demand that the employer or the HR service provider that conducted that job interview delete my interview? Can I demand that they not use my interview for any purpose? Um, Conversely, can an HR service provider or Procter and Gamble or a law firm or whoever it is that I'm interviewing with, can they keep that? And can they use it down the road? If it's an HR service provider that is, uh, you know, doing the or helping Procter and Gamble with the hiring, and then I later apply for a job with Coca-Cola, can it use the data that it gathered on me when I interviewed at Procter and Gamble to assess my fit for a position at Coca-Cola? And that in turn raises all kinds of interesting questions about, again, who owns the data? But if a handful of HR service providers are gathering all kinds of data on me individually, and they can access that data not just on a particular jobs that I'm searching for right now, but on another one that I do in 5 or 10 years, that's kind of like a digital resume or a digital fingerprint that's going to follow me all of my life. Um, and that I find rather concerning. At the very least, something stupid that I did at 18 or 22 years old uh, is going to remain in the data for a long time. Um, I know that many of my attitudes at 18 or 22 were not nearly as progressive as they are now, and I would hate to be held to that. Um, but some degree, if there's enough data collected, I I don't I we don't know exactly what our rights are over the data that's collected on us. Something that Lindsay will talk about a little bit more is the use of AI in the hiring process and the discrimination issues that it can raise. Um, we know from lots of studies on the hiring process that as human beings we tend to want to hire people who look like ourselves, right? And if most of the people doing the hiring are white males, then they are going to tend to replicate themselves. um, AI on the upside can be used to decrease the bias by perhaps taking humans out of the process, or at least by minimizing the unconscious bias that humans can bring into the process. But AI can also exacerbate discrimination in hiring, because if they'll garbage in, garbage out to any computer program or algorithm. If the algorithm is told, replicate our star performers today, figure out what they said in their resumes and look for that in the resumes of applicants. And if most of the startup company is white, male, young, then the algorithm is going to tend to look for those folks too. But I'm going to stay away from the legal issues and let Lindsay handle those. In the same way that AI can be used to track, an applicant, it can also be used to track a person's performance and pay and promotions. And so, surveillance is it's partly about control, but it's also about gathering reams of data that can be used to predict the future. So, for example, one HR company claims that it can predict which employees are likely to quit and how the employer might best retain them. Another says that it tracks hundreds of variables to recommend internal candidates for promotion. And yeah, the AI monitoring just takes regular monitoring to a whole new level. So it's not just tracking keystrokes. It's not just watching physically where people are in the workplace. It goes way beyond that. And so, Sentry PC, for example, allows supervisors to monitor what a particular worker on a computer is viewing on her monitor at a given time. They can track keystrokes, tell a supervisor, or just record which websites a person is going to. Are they spending time on Facebook, on Amazon, looking at cute dog videos? um, but it goes a step further too, right? From not just recording the screens, but like I said, they can monitor all the words that I input into my computer absolutely all day. And again, it's not necessarily just looking for keywords like explosion or AK-47 or something like that. It could be looking for correlations that we've never dreamed of to make predictions about how I will perform on the job. Um, Amazon has folks has its warehouse workers wear wristbands that track not just where they are in the warehouse, but literally every movement that a person makes with his or her arm to make sure that that person is absolutely the most efficient that he or she can be in moving packages from point A to point B. Um, uh, Agito, one of the brands up here, listens to customer service calls and grades workers on empathy and on how quickly and effectively they solve complaints. And they also grade customers on how amenable they might be to an upsell. Uh, and again, this isn't listening in the sense that a human being is listening to a conversation. Most employers don't have time to have a supervisor listening to a worker 24, every minute, I mean, that the worker is working. Instead, these are algorithms that are tracking words, that are tracking, again, crunching, collecting the data, collecting the verbal data, the audio data, the text data, and then analyzing it to crunch numbers. Um, Others, I think Humanize has workers wear ID badges that contain microphones. And so not only do they track where you go in the office, but who you're speaking to. Are you speaking more to males versus females? Are you using a different tone of voice when you're speaking to males versus females? Are you using a different tone of voice when you are speaking to people above you in the hierarchy or below you in the hierarchy? How much time are you spending? All that kind of stuff, right? And again, it's not monitoring in the traditional sense of looking over your shoulder or listening to your phone calls. It is using AI to crunch that data and to make predictions about your work performance, your propensity to be a star performer, to make recommendations as to whether you get a job promotion, whether you get fired. And so here are just a couple of screenshots of the kinds of data that can be gathered in real time. Um, but that again doesn't even scratch the surface. So tons of on-the-job monitoring. Uh, it's growing exponentially and will continue growing. As the technology gets better, as the computer, I mean, as it just gets cheaper to collect the data and to crunch the data, companies will do more of it. And you can imagine at some point in the not too terribly distant future, a company might well get sued if it's not doing this kind of monitoring, and it turns out that someone uh, you know brings a gun to the office and kills somebody, and hey, if you've done a little bit of monitoring, you could have figured this stuff out. um, There's also a lot of the other thing that one of the other things that it makes it possible to do. Well, actually, let me hold off on that one. So just a little bit more about the kinds of monitoring that employers are doing, and this gets at the point of monitoring workers off duty and online work. And so you probably all heard the story about someone who gets fired for calling her, his or her supervisor a Nazi on Facebook. And the way that they usually get ratted out is they forget that they have made the supervisor or a coworker a Facebook friend, and so they say something stupid, and they get ratted out and they get fired. Um, but AI makes it possible to gather everything that there is about you on the web without a human being having to do any of it, right? A human being doesn't. It's not. It would not be efficient for an employer to monitor to have a human being monitor everything that every worker does on Facebook or on social media. That would be a huge time suck. But AI can do it instantly and almost for free, right? So just type in Rick Bales, gather everything you can about Rick Bales, pick up the social media feeds, pick up anything he's typed into an email, pick up his voting records, you know, driving record, all that kind of stuff, right? All of that can be gathered and then can be crunched. And again, if you got enough data, you crunch enough data, you can predict a lot about who I am, what makes me tick, what I'm likely to, whether I might be interested in forming a union, right? So here I've talked very briefly about what this might mean for unions, but I'll be very brief about this because Lindsay will talk more about it as well. So a few kind of takeaways from my presentation. One is that surveillance is getting much more extensive and much more intrusive. Second is that I am concerned about the possibility of creating something that looks like a permanent digital resume. If someone out there is collecting all kinds of data on me that I have no control over, that makes me really uncomfortable. And third is that I think that there is a new role for unions um, somehow. Perhaps regulating AI surveillance. Mentioned before the possibility of the concerns with the personal digital resume. I think there's a new role for unions in bargaining. Um, and I think that there's a legitimate argument that gathering gathering certain types of information anyway can chill Section 7 rights. I mean, if an employer can predict my propensity to form a union, um, that's concerning. So let me end there and end my share screen, turn it over to Lindsay. And again, if anyone has any discussions or any questions or whatever, love to hear it at the end here.
Great. Thanks so much, Rick. Really appreciate all of that wonderful information. And picking up where you left off here. So going through, let's see, here we go. So picking up from we've talked about Big Brother and all the scary data that can be collected for employees and all the different software that might be available for employers out there in the universe to use. And so how is that actually being regulated? Because we know the capacity of which an employer might have these tools at their fingertips to be able to utilize in the workplace. And of course, technology is moving now at the rate of speed like we've never seen before. Some of the examples about this sort of AI revolution is that it's not one in which the prior kind of revolutions, even with the advent of the internet, where we've had this opportunity to have a learning curve where students have been able to get the information that they need in schools and traditional education programs, but really it's incumbent upon all of us to engage in a lot of self-study and self-education to make sure that we're staying on top of this as the government, as legislators are trying to scramble to figure out how to regulate these things as well. So from the beginning, the EEOC took an initiative, the EEOC being, of course, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, announced in 2021 that they were taking an initiative to study AI. And so what we'll see is kind of the theme of a lot of either local governments, federal governments, state governments, and these federal agencies is first to study rather than act. And so the EEOC engaged and launched their study in 2021, where they announced that they were going to be looking at the use of AI tools in employment and try to figure out how to regulate them. And in that teaser, we saw, hey, there's going to be some future technical assistance, technical documents coming out about how the EEOC perceives that their laws are intertwined or can apply to employers' AI usage. So just this year, then, we saw in May, the EEOC released 2 different technical documents, one speaking on Title VII requirements, and the other was speaking on the ADA, an application of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So with the ADA, the EEOC really looked at the way that there's accessibility for users in the employment arena, and how can AI tools that are being implemented in the workplace also implicate ADA or constitute ADA violations. And so one of the things that the EEOC looked at in their technical document was, are there barriers in the workplace, such as even from the beginning of a hiring process and an interview process, that might stunt the ability of individuals with a disability to be able to have access or fair use of those kind of opportunities. For example, let's say there's a certain timed test that an employee has to, or applicant has to take, and that the applicant's being measured based on their ability to complete a timed test. But certain individuals with disabilities might be hindered in their ability to otherwise complete the timed test, and with reasonable accommodations, they could otherwise perform the essential functions of the job. Maybe these timed tests are not narrowly tailored for legitimate business interests, or maybe they're not even relevant to the actual job duties themselves. And so when we're looking at AI applications, even from the hiring process, are there certain AI applications that are being used that are going to have that disparate impact on individuals with disabilities? Just going back, I know that everybody here is seasoned in a lot of these terms, but just as a refresher, a lot of the regulations that we've seen come out so far are looking at AI applications in the workplace based on discriminatory impact or disparate impact. And so what we're going to see, and what really disparate impact means from a legal setting, is a facially neutral workplace policy or practice that has a disparate impact or a disproportionate impact on individuals of a certain protected trait. And so in this situation, we're looking at, are there facially neutral employment practices that an employer might use that aren't either, they could be unintended or intentional to actually have a disparate impact on individuals with a disability. When we're looking at disparate impact claims under Title VII or under ADA, those don't have to be intentional to be a violation of these laws. And so it could just be the disparate impact alone, statistically speaking, can be enough to suffice for a violation, as long as you're meeting the other elements of those claims. So that's why it's really important when we're looking at an employer rolling out some of these practices, especially with AI usage, to see, okay, are these things that are actually going to have a disparate impact on individuals, like individuals that are ADA protected. One of the things that the EEOC said with their ADA technical document that is really interesting is that a lot of legislation has looked at, okay, if an employer is going to utilize an AI tool, and they're commonly called an automated decision tool or an automated employment decision tool. So they're going to use AI to make some sort of employment decision, either to scan resumes, like Rick said, or to check productivity to decide who's going to get a promotion or a raise or so forth. So if you're going to use that AI tool and then you're going to rely on that to make an employment decision, a lot of these regulations are requiring that these AI tools that are being used, if they're being used to make an ultimate employment decision, have undergone either what we call an impact assessment or a bias audit. And so what that really requires depends on the legislation itself, but the general idea is that you have an expert that's tested that AI tool to see, will it have a disparate impact on individuals of a certain protected category. For example, if you're scanning resumes, kind of like Rick was alluding to before, and potentially you're using it to find, you say, hey, look, I have this star employee that I really want to find another one of these people somewhere out in the world and hire them for this new position. And so you use that person's resume to scan other resumes to see, find this person. But perhaps that AI tool that you're using, and one example that happened in real life with a tech company was that resume was a male resume, and for example it said male chess club on the resume, right? So the AI tool was scanning other resumes to find something maybe similar to that, and if there was the word woman, like women's chess club on a resume, that resume might be downgraded because it's dissimilar to the model resume. In that situation, it might have a disparate impact on females because of the way the AI tool is being utilized. And it may or may not be intentional, but it still could be a violation of Title VII. So when we're looking at, and we'll talk about those regulations in more depth in a little bit, but one of the things that's important about the ADA guidance from the EEOC is that the EEOC warned that an AI bias audit alone may not uncover potential ADA violations using AI tools, because you really need to work with experts who might have the expertise in certain disabilities to test how this AI tool may impact them from a negative standpoint. So it's really going to be a learning experience, a work in progress as you're rolling out these tools, and to make sure that the employer is engaged in that good faith exercise to ensure that there's not ADA violations. So I'm just highlighting what the technical document is. It's really a helpful tool if anybody's interested in it, and I would encourage you guys to go look at it, to read it and understand. But I just wanted to highlight that from the EEOC's perspective, an impact assessment or a bias audit alone might not be enough to suffice for employers' good faith defense that they haven't engaged in activity that would violate the ADA. So then the next technical document that we saw from the EEOC in May 2023 was Title VII requirements. And this is kind of what we talked about before with the resume screening examples and so forth, where the EEOC said, hey, look, their employers might be using these automated employment decision tools in the workplace, and they should be undergoing an AI audit or bias audit. Now, the EEOC isn't going so far as to mandate that those are required, but certainly acknowledging that that could suffice to show that the employer engaged in good faith actions when deploying an AI tool, if they can show that they've actually taken affirmative steps to parse the AI tool through an AI audit, or that it's gone through that bias audit. So remember, when we talk about Title VII requirements, or even the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in general, there is a kind of what Rick was talking about before. Maybe you're using an AI tool for personality tests, video software, all of these different sorts of things. You can amass wonderful data, wonderful depending on whose perspective, but is that data, one, necessary, and two, is it going to have a disparate impact on certain individuals? One of the things that we've seen come out of concern of certain AI tools is facial recognition software. As Rick mentioned, it can have what's called, I think the term is like a color gaze, which basically means that it can disproportionately impact individuals of color with certain facial recognition software. And so there can be concerns about utilizing that software in certain employment decision tools, using AI, and how that can have a disparate impact on individuals with color. Personality tests, might have other violations of Title VII. And so one of the things that we want to look at through the technical document and the EEOC guidance is to ensure that you're parsing through any AI tools to ensure that you're not violating Title VII as well. And just going back one time, while there might not be, like, for example, as a teaser, Ohio doesn't have any current legislation regulating AI, but to remember that employers that fall within the purviews of federal laws, if you're using an AI tool, it still may be in violation of the federal EEO laws. And for example, we saw this case against the iTutor group that the EEOC brought, and what many have said is the first litigated case potentially that the EEOC's brought over AI, use of AI tools. And so in this situation, we had iTutor Group, which was an Asian company employing or engaging in, because there was a question as to whether or not they were independent contractors or employees, but they were basically utilizing tutors in the United States for tutoring services. And part of the iTutor Group's application process, their algorithm was trained per the EEOC to parse out certain individuals based on age and gender as well. The difficult part with a lot of these AI tools, though, is that individuals don't actually know that they're being passed over because of use of AI tools. And in this situation, the reason that the applicant was actually flagged, or that she even noticed that this was a problem, was because the application asked for her birth date. And so when she actually put in her birth date and put how old she was, and she was above 55, she got an automatic rejection. Whereas when she changed her birth date and information, she went ahead through with the process. And so that flagged that there was a problem with this. But what we'll see is a lot of times applicants might not even know that they're being subject to an automated employment decision tool by an employer, because they don't even know that that tool is being utilized. In some situations, we'll find employers don't even know that they're utilizing those tools, because they're just going ahead, like Rick said, about utilizing software from a third-party vendor, HR vendor, and they're like, cool, this vendor can do all these things for us and give us all this data, sign me up for this, and they're a reputable company. And little does that employer actually know that the employer is utilizing, sorry if you hear my daughter in the background, that the employer is actually utilizing, or that the vendor is actually using that AI software. So in this situation with the iTutor Group, there was actually a compensation that the iTutor Group had to pay. There was mandatory anti-discrimination training, and if they ever do operate in the United States again. And so they found that there was a violation of the ADEA. So kind of teasing then, what is the current state of AI legislation so far? We know that there's federal legislation here that we talked about with Title VII, the ADA, the ADA, and so forth. Illinois and Maryland kind of led the way, even I think as early as 2020, where they passed regulations regulating video interviews using AI and facial recognition consent and hiring. We've also seen, like, Illinois having the BIPA, the biometric testing laws as well. So for employers using that facial recognition, using fingerprints, maintaining biometric data, kind of what Rick had also alluded to about concerns about retention of that data, how employers utilize that, how they retain it, are there disclosure requirements. So that was our first kind of round of what we saw for legislation from a state level. The first true AI regulation that we've seen in the United States that's specific to employment regulations for AI is New York City Local 144. This is applicable to any New York City resident, as well as any employer who's employing or potentially hiring or reaching out to residents of New York City. So important for employers that if you're hiring somebody remote and that person happens to be in New York City, you still might be subject to these laws. The New York City Local requires that if an employer is using an AI test or an automated employment decision tool that it's undergone a bias audit. It's a pretty robust legislation, and it really served as the first law that's been enacted now to guide employers for AI use. And then what we've seen across other states and local jurisdictions is the creation of these task force to study AI. And from there on, we'll probably see more legislation being rolled out, as we've seen more pending legislation, as well as local cities, towns, counties, and so forth are studying this and then deciding how to implement it. One of the states that we've seen kind of leading the way in a very robust AI legislation, not surprising, is California with AB 331. But at the moment, California actually has not enacted any specific AI legislation, although we anticipate that that might be forthcoming soon. Unlike New York, where the New York City Local 144 regulates automated employment decision tools, California's AB 331 speaks to automated decision tools, and that's using AI in a whole host of different industries, not just related to employment, but even related to insurance and other sorts of uses of AI. And so we've seen that under AB 331 that it requires an impact assessment is conducted on any AI tool that's being used for those decision tools. Some of the other key points of these legislation are that if there is a bias audit conducted, it has to either be under California's situation, it has to be submitted to the California Civil Rights Department and kept on file. In New York City, they actually require that the bias audit is publicly made available on a website so that others can see what the bias audit is. And the other key point of a lot of this legislation is if an employee or an applicant may be subject to an automated employment decision tool, it requires notice. It requires to give them a heads up, hey, this is what we're using it for, this is how it works, this is how it might affect you. So then the individual has an opportunity to know, okay, these are the types of tests that are being used. It certainly can help if an individual has a disability and they have to request a reasonable accommodation, or if there's concern about a disparate impact. So that's really what we're seeing, the evolution of the state legislation. And California has really been hailed as leading the way for that. As that legislation is getting modified. And then more recently, we saw President Biden's administration issue a federal executive order on AI, and really it's a call for legislation, a call for agencies to develop regulations, and really ensuring safety test results are shared with the government for companies that are developing models posing serious risk to national security, AI models, and also calling for certain regulations and civil rights for AI usage and so forth. And so likely we'll see more agencies focusing on AI safety. Again, going to Rick's point, the DOJ, for example, has been working on rolling out some AI legislation as well. And so we see that all in the works, with President Biden really calling on different agencies to get ahead of this AI legislation and consider its implications here. And then again, unions have led the way. So where we haven't seen regulations, we've seen unions interact. And if you are reading the newspapers or headlines, I'm sure everybody, or missing some of your favorite television shows, you might have noticed with the Hollywood strikes and so forth, having to do with AI regulation, contract negotiations, and so forth. And so where we've seen those kind of entities engaging in this kind of preventative measures to protect their members. One of the other unions that have been really active in protecting their members or engaging in negotiations related to AI has been in Las Vegas. We've seen like the culinary unions engaging in negotiations and potentially a strike or talks of a strike to happen in the near future regarding AI implementation. In 2018, some of those unions had reached a deal wherein they required that if there was going to be introduction of a new technology, their members had to be given advance notice and free training on that technology or software. So it's likely that we'll also see unions engaging in preventative measures or negotiations with AI in the forefront to consider how they can protect their members, ensure that increased training if there's going to be job disruption or job replacement due to AI, to give them advance notice and opportunities to continue on in some point of their employment situation. So best practices for AI in employment. One of the terms that I love and I think has been so cool is the idea of upskilling. If you guys are at all subscribers or readers of the Harvard Business Review, the past publication was the whole publication was focused on AI and focused on the value of upskilling. And basically what it's calling upon, and the idea of upskilling, is that all of us from whatever level downward have an obligation to teach ourselves, understand how AI works. And what I've seen from a lot of clients that I've worked with in different sectors is that they don't even have an idea of AI. They put their head in the sand. They're like, I don't know how that works. I don't want to learn. But we're not at a place anymore where we can shy away from this technology. It's happening now. It's going to affect our jobs. It's going to affect the way that we engage in our own job duties and others. So getting a handle on it. A lot of employers, like we said, don't even know that the AI is being utilized in the workplace, especially in HR functions. So even step back and doing an AI audit to say, okay, well, let's take an assessment of all the tools that we're using in the workplace. Let's see which ones are incorporating AI and then understand what we can do about that. And that's really the best first practice. There's been some great examples, even in the public sector, of way that AI has been utilized to streamline efficiency. For example, Lieutenant Governor Husted in Ohio has worked to use AI to review some regulations and kind of update those regulations. And they hailed that use of AI as saving 5 years worth of employee time and work by utilizing the AI tools. So there's definitely ways that it can improve. And by upskilling, the idea is let's take away the automated tasks that are like low brain level activities and really free up the human's time to do those higher level activities that AI truly can't accomplish at this point. And so it makes everybody more efficient. It makes time more efficient for time and gives people the opportunity to work at their highest level. Again, education and AI use is incumbent upon all of us to consider. If we're going to use AI in the workplace, let's make sure that we're devising policies for appropriate use, whether that be if individuals are able to use ChatGPT or other sort of software, what kind of privacy parameters are we going to put around that, confidentiality considerations and so forth? Because at the end of the day, whether or not there's a policy or there isn't, employees are using these kind of programs themselves as well to do their job. And so it's important for an employer to educate individuals about the risks in using that, as well as the positives and appropriate use of that. And if there are job restructurings like upskill, look at what we can do to free up individuals' time to make it more efficient for them, for their job, and to use AI to improve the job satisfaction and improve the employment situation. So that is all. I tried to keep it concise. There's a lot more that we could say about this, but I just wanted to speak on high-level details. Just to takeaways are that we're seeing implementation of laws related to AI, but keep in mind that the federal laws that are in existence now do still apply and can apply to use of AI. It's important for us to get an understanding of what AI we're using in the workplace, so then we can decide and make sure that it's being used in appropriate ways, consider whether or not We want to be transparent about that, which is a best practice to give employees the opportunity to know what information is being collected, how it's being used. Like Rick said about deleting data, there might be also in certain states an intertwining of privacy laws as well to consider, like the California Privacy Rights Act might dictate how and when an employer can maintain this data and what sort of parameters of protection they have to put around the data that they've collected. So it's important that if you're working across state borders to understand if there's other laws that might be implicated beyond just simple AI federal laws as well. Thanks so much.
That was an amazing lecture, guys. Thank you so much for all of this information. I see that we have one question at least already. I was trying to add links in most of the time, but I missed one. Mr. Downs was asking for the title and date of the Harvard article that was mentioned.
That is, let me see here. I can get
And while
that.
she's looking, does anybody else have any questions for our lecturers?
One of the things we didn't talk about was ChatGPT, and I kind of mentioned in the links there that Brian's got some experience. So, Brian, you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, well, I've been using it since March. I've had the paid version since April, and a lot of it's just understand, what it can and can't do. I mean, there are a lot of horror stories out there about hallucinations, but I found, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. It's great for summarizing articles. In fact, I've summarized a lot of the links already that were provided in this chat. Just to get a high, quick, understanding about what the articles say. You're going to find some differences between, I think, versions, and the paid version definitely has more functionality of ChatGPT in that it can read PDFs, it could really read links. And I know a lot of times, legally, there are horror stories out there about cases. You have to watch confidentiality issues because no one really knows where this is going. But I could say that's true for cloud storage too. I mean, there are risks involved with any kind of technology. But I will link sometimes to hundreds of pages of documents. And I'll say, for use in this chat, hold this area of the law. I'll, cite the law and I'll get all my information in, and then I'll start working on the document. I found that it always underperforms initially. It almost always gives a lazy answer, but you keep prodding it and pushing it to give more information. Very seldom do I take what it gives me as a finished product, unless it's like something really simple. But what I will find is, I may have 2 or 3 tabs open. I like my research tabs, then I like my working document tab, and then I have a word processing document where I can cut and paste the information in I like. But I found, for things, like legal drafting, I mean, you do your research, you pull the citation out, and you put the citation into ChatGPT, and, for use later. And I found that, the problem with hallucinations and false information, is really minimal. Always, when you're getting information, ask for the source, so you get it, you go to the source and read the source and make sure, it's on point and has the correct understanding. But it's a mindset. You have to push yourself. You have to, see what it can do. And it's really impressive. And I think, sometimes even as much as I've used it, I am not pushing myself hard enough. So don't be afraid of it. You're not going to waste your time getting in there.
I had my students last year in my employment law course use ChatGPT to draft various employment documents. Kind of like what you were saying. It's not perfect. Be careful about anything that it purports to be a cite, but it's often a very good starting place for drafting something.
And the other thing sorry,
go
Chrissy.
ahead, Lindsay.
I'm just gonna note that, there's a whole host of confidentiality considerations when using ChatGPT. And since it's rolled out, they've actually changed a lot of that, where you can actually opt out from your data being used to train its models as well. And so when employers are considering about drafting like appropriate use policies, it might include things like the certain settings that you have to be using if you're going to use some of those chat generation tools in the workplace, and also parameters on kind of calling out any kind of confidential information in the event that you're not doing that, to make sure that there's no model training using the confidential information as well. But they are developing more confidentiality parameters, including ChatGPT or OpenAI rolling out like an enterprise system as well. And so that is something that's going to have increased confidentiality. So again, just making sure that you're keeping up on education and understanding what the actual user parameters are for the different tools that you're using, and how you can ensure confidentiality when using those tools if necessary.
That's right on. And then the enterprise version, you know, gives you the highest level of confidentiality, and it's just really coming out. You know, I'm finding things are changing so fast I can't keep up with it.
Thank you again, guys. This was some amazing information. We really appreciate your discussion today. I see we've had a couple comments from other folks in our chat log that have said they've asked the students in their classes to use AI for initial research, for presentations, and discuss the usage with other students. And like Mr. Eastman said, you know, we have seen those widely disseminated examples of things like the gentleman in the one court that actually got in trouble because it used false citations. So like Brian was saying, you still have to be very careful with it and double check stuff, but it is something that's potentially going to be a resource. Another gentleman said, I've got a bunch of stuff partially generated by GPT on their blog spot, from legislative bills to guides. So it's definitely something that is a good potential research tool, just it's one we're all still learning how to use. So any other quick questions? I know we've run over a little bit, but any other quick questions before we end for the morning? Not hearing any. Thank you so much, Lindsay and Rick. We really appreciated your lecture today. For those of you that are here today, we will be having another virtual event in December. Our virtual event in December will be speakers Betty Widgeon and Anna Widgeon, who will be speaking on unconscious bias. So if you are interested in attending, that will be a virtual event again. The date of it is the 19th of December. We will start at 11:30 like we did today with our networking, and our lecture at noon. If you're interested in it, please go to our website and register at I believe it's COLERA.com. But if you Google Central Ohio Labor and Employment Relations Association, you would be able to register. So we look forward to seeing you guys. Thank you so much for attending.